Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and welcome to today's video, which is another reading vlog, reading some booktuber favorites from 2024. This is part 2 in what I'm hoping will be a nice long spanning series on my channel. Born out of necessity because I have so many favorite booktubers and I couldn't possibly fit all of their favorite books into just one video. So I'm kind of clustering the different booktubers into little groupings. The first video contained 4 booktubers who I consider close friends, who I have kind of hit or miss similar tastes to. One of the upcoming parts is going to be booktubers that I consider friends who have really similar tastes to mine, and then I'm also thinking I will do a video on booktubers who I have almost opposite tastes to. And I think that will be really interesting. But the theme for today's version of this vlog is going to be some of my booktube idols. I've got 3 booktubers picked out who honestly may or may not have any idea that I exist, but I really enjoy and respect them and their content, and I'm so excited to read some of their favorite books of 2024. So just like last time, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to gush about these booktubers for a little bit. The first person I want to talk about is Kayla from Books and Lala. She is a huge reason that I have a booktube channel at all today. She is one of the OGs when it comes to themed reading vlogs and creatively linking books together or getting ideas of books to read for videos. I love her creativity and the way her mind works. And as far as our book tastes, I would say they're like medium aligned. I do love a lot of books that Kayla has loved, but I do think somewhat recently our tastes have diverged a little bit. She enjoys more speculative type books than I do. I like to stay pretty firmly rooted in reality, with the exception of some light sci-fi, which we'll talk about. We both used to read a lot of mystery thrillers, but I think we're both kind of getting away from that. She is shifting more into like the horror realm, and I have been shifting more into the just more general contemporary or more historical fiction. But I always watch her videos and trust her reviews, and the way she talked about this book, A Sky Full of Elephants, I knew immediately that I wanted to read this book, and I'm so glad that I am finally getting to it. I think the first time she talked about this book was a couple of months ago, but then it did end up on her favorites of the year list. This is a kind of sci-fi sort of dystopian book that is about a world where white people no longer exist. Now, I said I don't really care for speculative type books, but this type of like dystopian, near futuristic set novel is kind of the exception to that. I do love a good dystopia. I love reading a book set in a world in the not too distant future where something is different and imagining how I would react in that type of situation. Or in this case, I wouldn't react because I would no longer be alive. But I cannot wait to see how this book plays out and to get into the commentary of this type of world and just learn whatever it is this book wants to tell me. I am very excited to read it. The second booktuber I want to talk about is Bree from Locked Booktition. Bree also recently has been posting quite a lot of reading vlogs that have very interesting books within them and sort of sub-themes. I love Bree and her videos because she is absolutely never going to sugarcoat one of her reviews just because it's a popular book, but she's also not going to stray away from saying she likes something even if it's not necessarily the popular opinion to enjoy something. She actually constantly surprises me with what she picks up and ends up enjoying. For example, Frida McFadden, I know that Bree is a fan of, and I love that she's not afraid to try anything, and she's definitely not afraid to tell you how she feels about it. One book that was on Bree's favorites list from last year is The Trees by Percival Everett, and I'm so excited to read this book because I just at the end of last year read James by the same author, which was a very popular book that kind of blew up towards the end of the year. It won literary awards. I also really enjoyed that book and knew right after finishing it that I wanted to read more of Percival Everett's backlist. And I've seen similarly great reviews for The Trees, so I'm excited to get into this one. As far as I understand, this is more of a contemporary set novel, so not a historical fiction like James was. And I think this is kind of a murder mystery. I don't remember all of the details of the plot or even specifically what Bree had to say about it, but I am excited to try this book out and hopefully enjoy it as much as James. And then last but not least, the third booktuber that I am featuring in this video is Chan from Chandler Ainsley. Chandler has always been primarily a romance reader, and while I read some romance, it's definitely not my most read genre. And I also don't think that my romance taste perfectly aligns with Chandler's romance taste. But she has also been branching out recently to other genres, other types of books, which I love to see from her. And one unexpected book that I saw on her favorites list was Homegoing by Gyasi. Last year I read Transcendent Kingdom by this author, and once again really enjoyed it and knew I wanted to read more from their backlist. So I was so excited to see Homegoing on Chandler's favorites list. This is definitely the more popular book by this author. I have seen this book get a ton of praise and hype, so I'm excited to get to it and hopefully enjoy it just as much, and hopefully further solidify where it is that my taste aligns with Chandler's when it comes to books that are not just romance. So with that, I'm so excited to just dive right into these books. I will be back once I have finished one of them. I will give you a little bit better of a synopsis of the book in my own words. And then of course I will give you a review and let you know whether or not I would recommend it. So I'm gonna get to reading and I'll be back with my first update. All right, my friends, I am here with my first update. I've finished the first book for this video and I went ahead and started with Homegoing by Gyasi. This was one of Chandler's favorite books of 2024, and it's a little bit different from her normal taste or her normal reading preferences or habits, in my opinion, because it is a historical fiction book that follows a multi-generational family, starting with two sisters who live in Ghana, who make different choices for their lives that sends them down two different paths. And so we follow kind of like mini stories of each of their descendants and just follow their lives. And what Chandler loved about this book, I went back and watched her favorites video to refresh my memory. It sounds like she really loves the unique perspective that this book gave, how it felt really different and original from most other historical fictions that are on the market these days. And she enjoyed the distinctness of each of the characters, because really each character's story is kind of self-contained and isolated within the book. Once you go down a generation and start following that new character, you really don't go back a lot to talk about the ancestors anymore. You're just getting these kind of completed little vignettes, I guess, of each of these family members. And she enjoyed that way of storytelling, and I think she also really respected this author's skill in being able to develop characters so well within such a short amount of time that each of them got. And all of her thoughts about the book after finishing it myself, I agree with. I think she's correct, and the author did do all of that really well. I think when it comes to my tastes in books, that's just not really what I prefer. I would rather follow one set of characters for the length of an entire book. And I also, I don't know, something about multi-generational stories just have never really worked for me. There are very few exceptions to that rule. I don't know if it's because I just get bored following that many characters or they get confused in my head. I'm not sure, because I agree with Chandler here that each of the characters and their situations did feel distinct. I just feel like I didn't get enough time to really fall in love with them and root for them and care about where each of their stories ended up. Chandler also pointed out that this book is very character focused and character first, and meant by that there's not a whole lot of plot driving this entire story, and there really aren't any plot elements that follow through the many different characters, which she said she enjoyed, and she considers herself a character-driven reader. I definitely am a plot person. Typically when I pick up books, I pick them up because they have some sort of intriguing plot about them, and then I end up falling in love with the characters kind of secondarily. So I do struggle a little bit more with a book like this that is really only about the characters and kind of getting a glimpse into each of their lives, especially if there's no significant plot elements happening to them or stringing all of the characters together. So while I completely understand why Chandler loved this book and why so many other people love this book, it was unfortunately not a new favorite for me. And for me personally, I have also read Transcendent Kingdom by this author, and I did enjoy that one more. Homegoing is this author's debut, Transcendent Kingdom is their follow-up. And I hear most people say that Homegoing is their favorite of the two, so I'm maybe a little bit of the unpopular opinion here, but Transcendent Kingdom is a little bit more of your typical story following one main character in a linear timeline, though she does have flashbacks to her past and some of the same kind of themes come out in that book as they did in Homegoing, but it was a little bit more straightforward and easy for me to follow, and I also liked that book had a little bit of a kind of STEM element to it. So personally, that's my favorite. If your tastes align with me, maybe I would recommend trying out Transcendent Kingdom first, but if what I or Chandler said about Homegoing appeals to you more, then by all means check it out. It is a very highly rated and reviewed book in general, and again, I understand why, and I'm glad that I read it. I think I am going to land at 3 stars because I respect the book for what it is. I just didn't personally have any kind of emotional connection to it, and it wasn't an overall favorite, and that is okay. So with that, I'm going to continue on with the books for this video, and I'll be back with my next update once I have it. All right, friends, let's talk about The Trees, which I just finished by Percival Everett. This was one of Bree's favorite books from Locked Booktition, and I'm very excited to talk about this one. It's a very interesting book to describe. Before I describe this book, actually, let's talk about James, also by Percival Everett, which is another book that was on Bree's favorites list from last year. I had already read it, so I couldn't read it for this video, but I want to talk about it a little bit because Bree talked about them both at the same time in her video, and I also want to talk about them both a little bit. So James is historical fiction. It's inspired by Huckleberry Finn. It's kind of a reimagining of that story. I also loved that book when I read it and totally think it's worth all of the awards and accolades that it is earning. And what's interesting about reading The Trees is that I feel like The Trees is very different in tone from James. Even though the writing is just as beautiful, it definitely has overlapping messages related to race and code switching and like experiences of living as a Black person. But The Trees is a contemporary set novel. Maybe not fully contemporary, and we'll get to that in a second, but it's set more in modern times. So it has a very different tone to it, which I found interesting and wasn't really expecting it going into this book. And I'm not sure if as many people know that about this book. As far as the plot of The Trees, it's kind of a tough one to describe. It's mostly like a detective mystery book, I would say. We are primarily following these 2 Black detectives who are on this case. And the case starts out when there is this white man who is murdered, and at the crime scene, not only is there the dead body of this white man who is known and identified, but also there's a body of a Black man who nobody knows who he is. He's not able to be identified, and nobody really knows what happened with these 2 men. It's kind of a gruesome and unique crime scene, so these detectives are brought in, but then the next thing that happens early on in the story is that the body of the Black man seemingly has disappeared. So the detectives don't know, nobody knows what happened to him. Did he raise himself from the dead? Did somebody take the body? Was he ever actually there to begin with? Because again, he was unidentifiable. No one knew who he even was. And then even weirder, the same thing starts happening to where there is a murder, a white person is found dead, and right next to them is a Black person's body. And those Black bodies keep disappearing. So these detectives are solving all of these murders kind of at once, following this string of them that just keeps happening. Nobody knows why. All of the people in this town are mostly white people, so of course they're all freaking out. Nobody knows what's happening. And so they're not only having to solve the white people's murders, but they're also having to solve the mystery of this weird recurring Black person's body that's showing up at these crime scenes, but then disappearing. It's a very weird book to kind of wrap your head around. I enjoyed my experience reading this book for the most part. It read to me a lot like S.A. Crosby's books, which are kind of action-packed, a little bit like gritty and gruesome, plus a lot of commentary about what the experience is like for these Black detectives, being surrounded by white people, what kind of judgments they come across, and the things that they go through when they're just trying to do their jobs. And I have so many thoughts upon finishing this book. To talk about the ending of this book is kind of spoiling it, so I'm not going to say much for details. I'll say that I was personally unsatisfied if I'm approaching this book as a mystery or as a murder mystery, a series of murder mysteries. I am someone who likes answers. I tend to favor the mysteries that are tied up in a nice little bow. I know it's not life, I know it's not realistic, but when we're talking about books, I like my answers. So that's all I'll say about that. But I did also go ahead and watch back Bree's favorites video after finishing this book because I wanted to refresh my memory on what she loved so much about it. And it made me have even more of an appreciation for this book and probably the many messages that are within this book that I either did not notice, mostly because of my own biases as a white person, but also maybe cannot notice because they're not my lived experiences. They're not for me to relate to. And so that's why I really liked watching back and hearing Bree talk about this book, because it was so much more personal for her. And it resonated with her in a way that it shouldn't and can't resonate with me, but knowing that her connection with it exists makes me appreciate the book that much more. When she reviewed and was talking about this book, there's also an older female Black character in the book. And Bree was saying that when she read this book, it was like listening to her ancestors talk to her through this story. And that is so beautiful. And of course, I'm not going to have that same experience. I don't have the same ancestors as Bree, so how could I? But it just goes to show and further emphasize the fact that reading books about experiences that are not like your own is so important. Not only am I absorbing things from this story that Percival Everett was beautifully writing, but also in engaging with this online book community and watching Bree's video, I'm gaining extra appreciation for other people who relate to these stories and whose stories should be heard and talked about and promoted and lifted up. So for me to say like I didn't love this book because I didn't relate to it, it can be true, but it can also really diminish how much this book can and does mean to other people. So I don't know, I feel I guess a little bit kind of weird and conflicted about where that leaves me with my overall thoughts and opinions of this book. I'm really glad that I read it, and on that deeper level, I'm glad that I read it. But when I think more surface level, like, did I love the story itself? Did I love the conclusion of this mystery, which it ultimately is? No, not really. So I guess I'm left with like a 3.5 star rating, but that's not to say that I'm not really glad that I read it, and I am so interested in keeping an eye on what Percival Everett continues to write and pick up more books from him. I know he has a pretty extensive backlist as well, so I may go back and look for other books that he's written that might align a little bit better with my genre tastes. And yeah, all right, that felt a little bit rambly, but I guess I will be back once I have finished the final book for this video and can wrap it up. Okay friends, here to wrap up this video because I finished the third and final book for this vlog. I just read Sky Full of Elephants by Sibo Campbell. What a book. I had a real roller coaster experience reading this book. It starts off with such a bang. Not literally, but it kicks off with the inciting incident for what completely changes the world in this book. And it's that one day everyone wakes up as normal, but then all of a sudden, all of the white people on Earth take their own lives at the exact same time. And then the rest of this book kind of plays out what happens to the world after that happens. And obviously, it does a lot to the world. And right when that happens, that is such a riveting scene, or kind of couple of scenes that happen in succession, that I was really hooked right away for this book. And that premise of the book is what made me think that I absolutely had to read this book because I love books like this in general. Then this book goes into the rest of the plot, which is that it follows primarily this man who is a Black man who connects with a daughter that he didn't know that he had, who is biracial, and they have had extremely different, basically, life circumstances up until this point, but they are brought together and they basically survive together. They go on this kind of journey where they're traveling from place to place, kind of finding out what is left in the world, what is the world like now, and living their lives together. That part of the book really lulled for me. It actually felt a lot like Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, which is a similarly kind of apocalyptic traveling type story. That is not my favorite thing. I much prefer in a book like this to have like the macro view of what's going on and to come to understand how this is affecting like everybody, rather than zooming in and honing in on just a few characters and how it's affecting them specifically. I know that everybody has, you know, their different tastes and preferences, and that is great. I just know about myself that I prefer the bigger lens when we're talking about dystopian type books like this. But then towards like the second half of the book, it kind of came back around and started swinging upwards again, because then it gets more into like a sci-fi sort of explanation of why this happened to all of the white people. And at that point I became kind of reinvested, and it really got me towards the end, and I was on board with what was happening and really back invested in the story. So an absolutely wild ride. And I once again went back to watch Kayla's video, her favorites video, to hear again why this was one of her favorite books of the year last year. And it sounds like she had a somewhat similar experience of kind of slogging through the first half and then it clicking sort of what the book was more about and really what the second half was about, and she enjoyed it more after that. So I definitely relate to her on that point. I also appreciate a lot of the commentary and conversations that this book has and is trying to have. It's really interesting seeing a situation like this play out, because it kind of brings to light like what problems are solved by removing the white people that are really driven by people's racism as well as systemic racism, things like that. Those get better, but then there are some things like colorism and discrimination on other things other than race, and just like class systems and abuse of power. Like those things are not necessarily solved by just getting rid of the white people on earth. And so it was really interesting reading that play out. And obviously, like, we don't know exactly what would happen if this were to happen in real life. It's fiction, but I do love science fiction books like this so much because they get you to think like that on that deeper level and really examine like what are the problems that we currently have and what of those are something we can solve with some major change and what is just human nature. And I don't know, depending on how you look at it, that's either kind of hopeful or hopeless and dread-inducing to realize that some of it is just human nature and there's not really anything we can necessarily do to fix all of our problems. But at the end of the day, we are all humans and we do have to exist together. So I enjoy pursuing making that as, you know, enjoyable for as many people as possible at the same time. So all that being said, I feel a little, I don't know, in the air, kind of conflicted about what to rate this book. To me, it's not a 5-star book. I don't even really get 4-star vibes from it, so I feel like I'm also going to land at 3 stars for this book, which feels a little anticlimactic, a little disappointing to not have loved any of the books that I read for this video. But at the same time, I'm getting more out of it than just reading these books at face value. I'm enjoying getting to know more about my favorite booktubers and creators and getting to know the things that they love. That is meaningful to me, and also further understanding where my tastes align with these people, because these were all books that I was interested in anyway. This video concept just gave me a fun reason to read them and put them in a vlog. But it's fun to kind of think about, okay, why didn't I love these ones as much as some of my favorite creators, and how can I use that to inform my own personal reading choices going forward when it comes to taking recommendations from the people I watch online. I don't feel like I have all of the answers to those questions, but I enjoy thinking about them and continuing to get more information. So that is it for this video. Let me know if you have also read any of the books that I talked about, and if so, what your thoughts were. If not, let me know if anything I said sparked you to want to try to pick them up in the future. If you are not already subscribed to all of these lovely creators, please check out their links below. I love watching all of their videos so much. They inspire me a ton, so absolutely give them love. And other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.